So if you are standing, you may be seated. I guess I don't need to give you permission to be seated in your own living room or wherever you are. But thank you so much for joining us today. Again, my name is Brad. I am the teaching elder here at The Way, and it is not lost on me the privilege that I have this morning to come to you with these words of life from the Bible, sing praises alongside of you. And isn't it amazing that even now, around the globe, the message of the gospel is being proclaimed. And it's being proclaimed by thousands upon thousands of different people, different languages. But it's the same message. Isn't that an amazing thing? That the same message binds us all together in our faith. And I just love that about the gospel. So hey, if you have your copy of God's Word, we're going to get right into the text. We have much to talk about this morning as we talk about the idol of personal safety. The idol of personal safety. So we are studying through the book of Genesis. If you have your copy of God's Word, we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 12 this morning as we talk about the idol of personal safety. I'm sorry, I have to gather myself here. I almost had a Pentecostal fit while Dylan was singing. How'd you know to sing my favorite song, brother? How great thou art. I can't, either that or Amazing Grace. I can't decide which one is my favorite song. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 12 this morning, starting in verse 10. We're going to get right into the text. Where it says, "Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, 'I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife." Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake.' When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go.' And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Thus says the Lord." So again, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in with us this morning. This is day 7,264 of the quarantine. I'm just kidding. I don't know. It feels like that sometimes. I don't know if you feel like that. Groundhog Day, many of the days. But I hope that you are finding a blessing during these days of quarantine, forced isolation with your family. Who would have thought that that could be a blessing? And I think we're on maybe a month or so. The coronavirus continues to rage across our country and around the globe. There's talk presently of opening the country in the future, sometime soon, maybe not soon, I don't know. Of course, that's cause for much angst on the part of many folks. But again, the coronavirus continues to affect people. I don't check the stats too often, but I checked them this morning just for morbid curiosity. Across the globe, there's over 2 million cases, 2.3 million, with 732,000 deaths across the globe. Our nation, depending upon the source you look at, they're about the same though. 159,000 or 759,000 cases, 38,000 deaths. Actually, I'm getting those stats backward. I'm sorry, 732,000 cases, 38,000 deaths. Right here in Montgomery County, it's been fairly stable. We were under 100 cases for a couple of days, right, just hovering under 100. We're past 100, 108 cases, and we've been at that for a couple of days with 2 deaths. And again, even 1 death is one too many. And so needless to say, the coronavirus has a lot of people on edge for a number of different reasons. It's got us concerned for a number of different reasons. We're concerned this quarantine, the economic shutdown, what's the future of our nation, the loss of control that we have in the face of this virus that even the smartest minds around the globe have been collaborating for some time now and can't seem to find a great treatment. You know, you see rumors of different treatments. They have not come up with a vaccine yet or anything of this nature. Even testing is still kind of sketchy from what I read. And really, though, when you look at the reason that people are so concerned, it's for reasons of personal safety, either of yourself or maybe someone that you love. And that's a good thing to be concerned about your safety or the safety of someone that you love. But did you know that that can become an idol? And so this morning we are going to talk about the idol of personal safety. It's interesting, as I was reviewing this text earlier in the week, preparing for this message, there's some obvious lessons here with this account of Abram essentially giving his wife away. And so I was praying, God, what is the message here that you would have for the people? Because there's so many obvious messages here. You know, don't give your wife away to another person, to another man. You know, an obvious message would be some marriage lessons here. But God really laid it upon my heart to talk about this issue of personal safety. Let's get back into the text for just a little bit. So we're in Genesis chapter 12. We're starting to talk about the patriarchs. This is the founding family of the people of God, chosen by God. And so Genesis is leaving behind these global events that he talks about in the book of Genesis, from creation to the fall, to the rejection of God on a global basis, to the flood, the global judgment, and the corporate rejection of God at the Tower of Babel. And it's going to drill down and focus in upon this singular family that God has chosen to use in a mighty and a powerful way. And so we have Abram, who is the father of the Jewish people. So God goes to Abram. He's living in Samaria. He gives him this command to go to the land that I will show you, he says. Abram's partially obedient. He goes to Haran and he stops. He stops doing what God had told him to do. Genesis chapter 12, the first part of it, God comes to him again after his father dies. He waits until his father Terah dies. And he comes and he reiterates the command that he gave him previously in Samaria to go to the land I will show you. And then he makes these 4 wonderful promises to Abram. He says, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And then he says, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so Abram is obedient once again. He yields to the call of God, and he gets up and he packs up and he takes Sarah and his nephew Lot, and he proceeds to go to the land of Canaan, modern day Israel, which is exactly where God was going to send him. And he gets there and God says, I will give to your offspring this land. And so he builds an altar there. He travels around some more to Bethel and Ai and pitches his tent there. He builds another altar there. He calls upon the name of the Lord. In verse 8 and verse 9, he journeys on to the Negev. Our section today says there's a famine in the land. Now, it doesn't tell us how much time has passed between Abram's arrival in the land of Canaan and him realizing that there is a famine in the land. But famines don't happen overnight. And the indication is, the text seems to indicate that he never really stops in this land that God has shown him. That he comes in, he builds a series of altars, he calls upon the Lord, he continues to journey around, he sees that there's a famine, and he continues on down to Egypt. Again, the text doesn't say if he stopped and stayed in Canaan for any length of time, but it seems to indicate that he really never settled down. He just kind of continued on. Oh, there's a famine here. I need to go to Egypt. And he does. And when he gets to Egypt, he says to his wife as he's approaching Egypt, hey, you're very beautiful. We need to do something about this. Now, keep in mind that Sarah is between 60 and 65 years old at this time, but yet she is beautiful in his eyes. And so he says to her, hey, I need to protect myself, so say that you're my sister. Now, again, the text here sanitizes the account somewhat. Can you imagine really what that conversation or series of conversations looked like? I mean, the text really sanitizes it, that he is saying to his wife, his other half, his significant other, his spouse that God has given to him. He's saying to her, say that you're my sister. Now, this is not an untruth completely. She's his half-sister. There's a little bit of truth there, but not complete truth. And why does he do that? So that they won't kill him. Because Pharaoh is in the habit, evidently, of taking beautiful women for himself. This is not a new thing, and this is not an old thing. Men do this even today. Men wield their power and their influence and their authority to subjugate women. They even do this to this day. This is not a new thing. This is not a surprise that a godless king like Pharaoh would do something like this. And he does exactly what they say he would do. Sarah says that she is his sister, and she is taken into Pharaoh's home. And then Pharaoh lavishes gifts upon Abram. He gives him livestock. He gives him servants, male and female, different things. Let me see in verse 17 that the Lord comes and afflicts the household of Pharaoh with a great plague, and literally it's like sores. And somehow Pharaoh comes to realize what has happened. The text is silent about how he came to understand what has actually happened. But he does. He realizes that Sarah is not Abram's sister, but is in fact his wife. And so he goes to Abram and he issues a rebuke. He rebukes Abram, the father of God's people, chosen by God. He rebukes him and says, why did you tell me these things? Here she is back. You just take her and go. Just take her and go. And here you can take all of the stuff that I've already given you as well. This is a stunning account if you think about what's actually happening here. If you humanize it, if in your mind you envision the interaction between Abram and his wife, between Abram and Pharaoh, between his wife and Pharaoh, what did that interaction actually look like? I want to talk to you about evil for just a minute. There are two different kinds of evil. There is natural evil and there is moral evil. Here, Abram is confronted by both different types of evil. And I'm going to give you a lot of scripture in this particular section of the sermon, of the message, and that's for a very specific reason. I want you to hear loud and clear the words of God, what he says about evil. Natural evil is things like famine, drought, disease, cancer, physical maladies, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, even death itself. Certainly the coronavirus would be called a natural evil. The cause of natural evil is the same as the cause of all sin, and that is the fall. Scripture tells us that since the fall, all of creation has been groaning under the weight of sin. All of creation is subject to futility, is in bondage to corruption. When you look at creation today, it's like looking at a car accident. Now, when you see a car that's been in an accident, almost always you can still recognize it as a car, and there might even be parts of the car that have been unaffected seemingly by the accident, but the car itself has been twisted and corrupted and twisted by the sheer physics of the car accident. In much the same way, creation today has been twisted. It's groaning under the weight of sin, and that is why we have all of these natural evils. But what I want to seek to impress upon you this morning is the sheer sovereignty of God over natural evil. Listen to the words of the Lord. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 16. The word of the Lord says, "Then I will do this to you. I will visit you with panic, with wasting disease and fever that consumes the eyes and makes the heart ache." God says this to his people. I will visit you with disease and fever. God is absolutely sovereign over natural evil. Listen to the words from Deuteronomy chapter 32 through 34. This is the word of God, the Song of Moses. He says, "I will heap disasters upon them. I will spin my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them." Again, God is talking about his absolute sovereignty over famine, over plague, over pestilence, even over the wild beasts that are sent to devour the people. God is sovereign over natural evil. 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 1, Elisha says to the woman, "Arise and depart and sojourn where you can, for the Lord has called for a famine." The Lord has called for a famine. Psalm 105 verse 16, when God, summoned a famine on the land and broke all supply of bread. God summoned a famine. John chapter 9 verses 1 through 3, Jesus is traveling around with the disciples, and they come to a man who is blind, and the disciples, not understanding, say, "Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus responds, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." God is sovereign even over our physical maladies like blindness. He's even sovereign over things like in Jonah 1 verse 4 it says, "But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up." We see God's sovereignty over even the wind and the waves and the storms. That God is absolutely sovereign over natural evil. And some of these texts are tough to stomach. I mean, we don't know what to do with some of these verses, but this is just a small selection of the litany of verses that speak to God's absolute sovereignty over natural evil. And in this case, we have the natural evil of famine that Abram is confronted with in the land of Canaan. One type of evil is natural evil. Let's shift gears and talk about moral evil for just a second. Moral evil, again, has its roots in the same source as natural evil, and that is the fall of man. Since the fall, every man is born with two things. He's born with a guilty verdict. He's conceived in iniquity, and eventually his actions, his thoughts, his words, and his deeds match up with his guilty verdict. And so we have things like murder, sexual immorality, lying, cheating, stealing, all the different types of moral evil that have their roots in the fall of man. But guess what? God is just as sovereign over moral evil as he is over natural evil. I'm going to read you another series of texts, and this is just a small sampling of the texts that speak to this particular issue. And some of these texts, we don't know what to do with them. Again, they're hard, but they're there. Judges chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, talking about Samson. And Samson, when he betrays the commands of God, and he goes to the Philistines, in rejection of God's word, to find a wife. He goes to find a godless woman from amongst the godless people of the Philistines for a wife, and his mother and father grieved this, but it says in verse 4 that they did not know that it was from the Lord. This was a moral evil committed by Samson, but it was from the Lord. Again, some of these verses we don't know what to do with. 1 Samuel chapter 2, 23 through 25. This is talking about Eli and his two wicked sons. And the two wicked sons were so wicked that they were having sexual relations with the women who would come to worship at the temple. His father Eli rebukes them. They don't listen. Verse 25 says they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. It was the will of the Lord to put them to death. Again, that's a tough passage to think about. 1 Kings 22:23. Therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. The Lord put a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. Psalm 105:23-25, talking about how the people of Egypt turned against the people of Israel while they were in slavery. And it says, God, turned their hearts to hate his people. It is God who turned the hearts of the Egyptians to hate his people. Again, these are difficult verses to understand, difficult verses to deal with. Isaiah chapter 10 talks about that God raised up the kingdom of Assyria as a judgment upon the northern kingdom of Israel. It's God who dispatched them against his people. But it says in chapter 10, verse 7, he does not so intend, speaking about Assyria, his heart does not so think. It is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. God dispatched Assyria, raised them up in judgment against his people, but that was not what the Assyrians intended. They intended to destroy. Even the theme verse for the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, where Joseph looks to his brothers and says, as for you, you meant evil against me. Your intentions were evil, but God meant it for good. It was intentional, this evil that the brothers had done against Joseph. I mean, they assaulted their brother. They harmed their brother and sold him into slavery. This is a moral evil. God meant it for good. Again, we don't know what to do with some of these texts. They're just there. In this case, we see the moral evil of Pharaoh, a rich and powerful ruler who evidently uses his position and his authority to subjugate women for his own gratification. Again, this is nothing new. This has been going on since the dawn of man, and it goes on to this day. I want to impress upon you a couple of lessons, a couple of things. First of all, that God is not the author of evil. God is not responsible for evil. God is utterly good. He is completely holy and righteous. He holds his people. He holds people accountable for the evil that they do. But at the same time, I want to impress upon you the absolute sovereignty of God over all things, including and especially evil. He's sovereign over calamity. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 14. I mean, listen to this verse. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other. God has made the day of prosperity and the day of adversity. These are tough verses. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. God says, I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does these things. What do we do with this kind of text? Amos chapter 3, verse 6 says, does disaster come to a city unless the Lord has done it? God is absolutely sovereign over calamity. He's sovereign over the decision-making of people. Again, people try to explain away evil by applying free will, but we see the sovereignty of God over even the free will of men. Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Jeremiah 10:23. I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps. It's not in man who walks to direct his own steps. God is sovereign over all. Psalm 115:3. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11, that he is working all things, not some things, all things according to the counsel of his good will. And so when we're confronted with this aspect of the sovereignty of God over natural and moral evil, what are we to do with this? May I suggest that we emulate the Apostle Paul, who in Romans chapter 11, at the end of this great text upon the sovereignty of God, all he can do is exclaim, "Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen," is what Paul writes. So we see the sovereignty of God, the hand of God all over natural evil, all over top of even moral evil. But this evil is the reality that confronts us as believers, as people of God. Even today, we are confronted with natural evil. We're confronted with moral evil. And Scripture tells us that that will be the case until we are personally glorified or he comes again to set all things right. What will we do? How will we conduct ourselves in the face of natural evil and in the face of moral evil? Let's get back to the text for just a second. Let's check out how Abram responds. How does Abram respond to being confronted with natural evil and with moral evil? Well, the first one is the natural evil. He gets to Canaan. He's confronted with a famine. And again, I'm not downplaying a famine. This is a serious thing. There are people starving to death because of this famine. It says it was severe in the land. So what does he do? He leaves. He packs up. He doesn't have any children at this point in time. He packs up his wife, Sarah, and his nephew Lot, and he leaves. Evidently there's food in Egypt, maybe. For some reason he thinks it's better in Egypt. So when he's confronted with the moral evil or the natural evil of a famine, he flees. He leaves. What are his motives? Well, his motives are pretty clear. He wants to eat. He wants to feed himself. He wants to take care of his wife, probably his nephew Lot. I mean, these are honorable motives. There's nothing wrong with these motives as he flees the natural evil. But as he's approaching Egypt, he knows he's going to be confronted with the moral evil of the wicked Pharaoh who wants to take his wife and make her his own. And so what does he do in confrontation with the moral evil of the Pharaoh? He yields to it. Says to his wife, "Say that you're my sister and go and be this other man's wife." He gives his wife away. And why? What are his motives? He tells us loud and clear. His concern, "They will kill me and let you live. Say you're my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared." He throws in, "for your sake." But his primary concern is for his physical life, his personal well-being. We see in the actions of Abram, the father of God's chosen people, that he has made an idol of personal safety. He's made an idol of personal well-being. What is idolatry? Let's define idolatry. Let's take a second and make sure we don't mess up idolatry. So God gave us the moral law at Sinai, Exodus chapter 20. It's recorded right up front. "You shall have no other gods before me. Worship only God." What are the two greatest commandments? In summary, we worship the Lord God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We love him with all of that. The second greatest commandment is we love our neighbor as ourselves. God tells us, "I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other God before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, a graven image, an idol." What is it that men do but make idols? We don't have to be taught how to make idols. We don't have to learn how to make idols. We are intensely proficient at making idols. We'll make an idol out of anything. What is an idol? An idol is anything that we worship and pursue. The things that we worship are reflected in the things that we pursue. Because we worship them, we pursue them at the expense of others. Merriam-Webster even tells us that an idol is something we worship as God. There are some obvious idols that people make. Money is a great idol. Maybe that's why Jesus talks about money so much. Financial security. How many of us, and I think men are really vulnerable to this idol, the idol of financial security. I mean, what is it that so many men pursue? That I can acquire enough wealth, that I can accumulate enough finances, that I can retire early and spend the rest of my life serving myself. I mean, this is a great idol for people, men, other people. Make an idol out of power, out of prestige, out of influence, position, authority. I idolize if I can just get to this level, if I can just get this promotion, if I can just get to this status, then everything will be okay. We make an idol out of this. We make an idol out of possessions. And again, I think many men are vulnerable to this. Maybe women too. I'm sure women too. But we see if I can just get this next thing, if I can just get a few more square feet in my house, or a little nicer vehicle, or a better truck, or a boat, or a jet ski, then I'll be happy and I'll just pursue these things. I make an idol out of these things. I make an idol out of other people. How many of us idolize other people? Political leaders. So many people make idols of political leaders. You know, when I see political rallies, it just stuns me that people go to a rally to celebrate another man, a fallible man. I'm sure there's a good reason, and they want to show support for their favorite political candidate, but people idolize political leaders. People idolize celebrities. Is there a more mundane and trite group of people to idolize, to put on a pedestal, to worship than celebrities? But yet we have magazines, we have publications, we have that sell millions and millions of copies that document the most mundane details of celebrities' life, because so many people worship celebrity. But these are obvious idols. There are subtle idols. You can take something that's good and make it an idol. Physical fitness. I know people that make idols of physical fitness. And maybe it's appearance that goes along with physical fitness. And physical fitness is a good thing. I mean, we ought to take care of the temple of God. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And my body is the vehicle that can deliver my mouth and my mind to proclaim the gospel message. So I got to take care of the vehicle. It's the vehicle that can deliver my hands and my feet to allow me to serve my fellow man. We've got to be careful not to make it an idol. This is a temptation for me. I love physical fitness. I like to work out. I like to lift. But it's very tempting for me to make it into an idol. How many people make idols out of their family? Their children even. Husband, wife. Everything they do revolves around their children, activities, sports, education. My family growing up, education was an idol. Again, education is a good thing. Don't hear me say that education is not a good thing. I believe in education. I believe in higher education. We all ought to be lifelong learners. However, we cannot make education an idol. Again, in my family, as long as you got good grades, I mean, you can do just about anything. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but education was put on a pedestal. Achievement can be an idol. And again, we ought to pursue excellence in whatever our chosen field of endeavor is, but we cannot make an idol out of achievement. We make idols out of a litany of things. There's an infinite number of things that we can make an idol out of. And here we see Abram is idolizing his own personal safety, his own personal well-being, his own personal welfare. What is he sacrificing because of this? What did Abram sacrifice on the altar of personal safety? Well, he sacrificed quite a few things. When it comes to the natural evil of the famine, consider, God had called him to Canaan. God said, go to the land I will show you. And this was the land. He showed it to him. He said, this is the land. And as soon as he realized there was a famine, he abandoned the call of God. He sacrificed the call that God had placed upon his heart on the idol of personal safety. He sacrificed his own obedience to God on the altar of personal safety. He sacrificed fellowship with God. If you walk in the darkness and claim to have fellowship with God, you lie and do not practice the truth. That's from 1 John. Maybe, just maybe, God was sovereign over this famine. Maybe, just maybe, God had purpose behind this famine. Maybe God had put Abram in the middle of this famine for a specific purpose, a specific reason. Yet Abram walked from this great call of God because of a natural evil, of famine. He sacrificed all those things on the altar of personal safety. What about when he was confronted with the moral evil of Pharaoh? Again, he sacrificed so much here. He sacrificed his integrity. He sacrificed his name. God had said, I will make your name great. I will bless you and make your name great. Abram took that and threw it away. Sacrificed that. He sacrificed intimacy with his wife. How do you recover intimacy with your wife after betraying her like this? He betrayed his very wife. The flesh of his flesh, the bone of his bone. He sacrificed once again the call of God. Consider that God has said, I will make you a great nation. Through your wife, you'll have offspring. But yet he took his wife who had not yet conceived and gave her to another man as his wife. He was so willing to sacrifice so much for what? To what end? On the altar of personal safety. On the altar of personal well-being. Listen, let me make some caveats here. I want to make some caveats. I want to be 100% clear in a couple of different ways. One, God doesn't call us to be foolish. A lot of people quote 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. God has not given us a spirit. He has not given us a spirit of fear. But he has given us a spirit of power, love, and sound judgment. We ought to have sound judgment. We ought to be using our brains. We ought to be using the reason, the intellect that God has given to us to make wise decisions. God doesn't call us to be foolish or reckless. 1 Timothy 5:8 tells us that a man who does not take care of his family, especially those in his household, he's worse than an unbeliever. Worse than an unbeliever. God puts a great priority on us taking care of our families. He doesn't call us to be foolish. Luke chapter 14, Jesus tells a parable teaching us to count the cost. God places a call upon our hearts. Again, we don't move recklessly, we move boldly, but we use the powers of intellect and reason and thinking that he has given to us so that we do not walk in foolishness. I want to make these caveats. God has called us to submit to the government. It doesn't matter if the government is godly. It doesn't matter if the government is good. As long as they are not ordering us to violate the tenets of our faith, we are to submit to the government. A lot of people crying tyranny these days. But hear me now when I tell you that the tyranny of worldly governments is an ancillary issue for believers. That's a civilian matter. I have much higher matters to attend to. I have matters of eternity to attend to. Tyranny of secular worldly governments is a secondary or a tertiary concern in the heart of a believer. And we ought to love our neighbors as ourselves. I want to make all of these caveats. However, let's get back to the text. Let's talk about the fallout from Abram's sin. Do you know that sin always causes suffering? Sin always causes suffering. Even our secret sin. Even the sin that we think that nobody else knows about has ramifications. Here, Abram is guilty of the sin of idolatry, of making an idol of his own personal well-being. And the ramifications are broad and long-standing. He's broken fellowship with God, for starters. David says in Psalm 51, against you and you alone have I sinned. He's broken fellowship with God. God has personally chosen him to be the father of his people. He's broken that fellowship. He's broken his fellowship with his wife. Again, I don't know how you recover intimacy and fellowship after betraying your wife in such a way. Consider also that he likely acquired the servant Hagar in Egypt, who would later drive a wedge between him and his wife. Again, there's long-standing ramifications for our sin. Even consider so-called innocent bystanders. You look at this and it almost seems unfair to Pharaoh. He didn't know that Sarah was his wife. He's just doing what he would do, and yet he's afflicted with a great plague, with boils. He's punished for the crimes of Abram. And again, that's a reminder to us that sin has fallout. And sometimes it afflicts your sin. My sin afflicts so-called innocent bystanders. People who may have had nothing to do with the sin that we committed. So listen, there's a couple of other caveats. God always takes into account, He's already taken into account our imperfect obedience. We walk imperfectly. And God has factored that. You couldn't mess up the will of God. You couldn't thwart the decree of God any more than a grain of sand could thwart a rushing river. And so I'm so thankful for that. We get back to the text here. We see that even in Abram's disobedience, even in his sin, as he's idolizing personal safety and he's sacrificing so much on the altar to personal safety, that God protects him, that God even blesses him. God gives him possessions and restores his wife to him and brings him back up out of Egypt. And it's the exact same thing in our lives. As we walk imperfectly, as we move imperfectly, as we obey God imperfectly, listen, God has already factored that into His decree. Listen, I want to leave you with some closing remarks. Here in a few minutes, I'm going to call Dylan up. Not quite yet, but here in a few minutes. Listen, COVID-19 is serious. Please don't hear me denying the serious nature of the coronavirus. I mean, we ought to take it serious. I mean, this is a serious thing. It is now the leading cause of death in America, as it is right now. It's what I read, or it was the second leading cause a couple days ago, still behind heart disease. I think it's past heart disease. And again, we ought to take it serious. We ought to apply the full measure of our intellect, the full powers of the secular governments that God has put into authority over us to solve the issue. And we ought to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. We ought to take it seriously. But at the same time, when we look at coronavirus, when we look at COVID-19, we ought to see it in light of the sovereignty of God. There are people praying in the coronavirus, God, take away the coronavirus, get rid of the coronavirus, forgetting the fact that the only reason the coronavirus exists is that it's part of the decree of God. It is accomplishing God's purposes. So yes, pray for it to end. Pray for healing. I am praying that God would supernaturally end the coronavirus, that there would be no doubt that it was God who ended the coronavirus. But even more than that, in a different way, in a better way, I'm praying that the purposes of God would be accomplished by the natural evil of the coronavirus. Are we going to accept that the coronavirus is as much the decree of God as anything? As you sitting there listening to these words of life today, accomplish the earth. If it be your will, let this cup pass from me. But if it not be your will. And so he went to the cross willingly, subjecting his personal safety on the behalf of those who had already rejected them, those who would reject him. An unbelievable message, the gospel message is. Are we going to forget that through the gospel, that on the cross, that Jesus destroyed the power of sin and death? Paul exclaims from 1 Corinthians 15, oh death, where is your power? Where is your sting? And so do we really move in fear for our personal well-being, our personal safety? Is that really what needs to drive and to govern everything that we do? It seems as if that is our motive. Do I really, on that day, whenever that blessed day is, when I stand before Jesus and I see him in all of his power and his glory, do I really want to look at Jesus and say, well, at least I was safe. At least I was safe. I didn't take too many chances. I didn't risk anything. I kept myself safe. Is that really what I want to say to Jesus on that day? And so do we look in the face of this natural evil that God has placed before us and sacrifice things upon the altar of personal safety? What about when it's a moral evil? What about when you're confronted with a moral evil? What about when somebody looks at you and threatens your personal safety on behalf of Christ? Don't preach Christ or you won't be safe. What about one day when our government is heading this direction? What about one day when our government comes to us and says, church, you will not preach the gospel. You will not preach the gospel in all of its power, in all of its authority. And there are ways, there are means that the enemy is using even today to push the government in that direction. You don't think it's happening? It's happening in Canada to the north, our nearest neighbors to the north. It's happening in Europe. It's happening around the globe, and it will happen here. So what about when the moral evil of a godless government comes to us and demands that we don't preach the gospel, or else will we succumb? What will we sacrifice on the idol of personal safety? So Dylan's going to come and sing. And I'm praying that this morning we would consider our motives. Again, don't hear me say that coronavirus is not serious. Don't hear me say that we should be rash and foolish. Don't hear me say that we should just cast aside all reason, that we shouldn't be concerned about life. Life is intensely important. And listen, I don't want to die any more than the next man. I love life. I love living. I got a beautiful family. I love my church. I love the call that God has given me. But let us quit moving in fear and making an idol out of our personal safety. Is that why Jesus died on the cross? No. Let us move in the shelter of the gospel that destroys the power of sin and death, removes the sting of death. Let us move in the power of the gospel. Do you know Jesus today? Do you hear the sound of my voice? Do you know Jesus? Do you know this gospel message? If not, maybe this would be the day that you could look to Jesus on the cross, Him crucified, and say, that was for me. That should have been my body up there. That should have been me receiving that punishment. Maybe this is the day that you would believe, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, and you will be saved. I'm praying for you right now that this would be the day. Let us pray. Lord, we love you and we praise you. We thank you so much for who you are and all that you have accomplished. God, I'm praising you that you have removed the sting of sin and death. God, that you have granted us eternal life. Hallelujah. May we move boldly. Yes, let's move with wisdom. But may we move boldly in these days. May we see COVID-19 as you see it. God, I'm praying that your will would be accomplished through COVID-19. I'm praying that your will would be accomplished right here on earth, just as it is in heaven. God, I'm praying for the harvest, that through this pandemic, you are strengthening your church. You're purifying your bride. God, that even now you're calling somebody out of the darkness and into the marvelous light, that we might know eternal life with you in heaven. God, I'm asking you to move in the hearts of your people today. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So, hey, wherever you are, please join us in singing. If you feel led to stand, don't miss this opportunity to respond to God in obedience. Don't miss this opportunity.